අයිබුවන් ඔබ දන්නවා දැන් දශකයකට අධික කාලයක් තිස්සේ ලංකාවේ මාධ්‍යවේදීන් ජනවාරි මාසය හඳුන්වන්නේ කළු ජනවාරිය කියලා. ඒ කියන්නේ මාධ්‍ය වාර්තාකරණයේ හේතුවෙන් ඝාතනයට ලක් වුණ අතුරුදහන් කළ පහත් වීමට ලක් වූ මාධ්‍යවේදීන් සිහිපත් කරමින් ඔවුන්ට සහ ඔවුන්ගේ පවුල්වල අයට යුක්තිය ඉටු කරන ලෙස අදාළ පාර්ශ්වයන්ට බලකරන කළු ජනවාරිය දැන් දශකයකට අධික කාලයක් මුළුල්ලේ ශ්‍රී ලංකාවේ මාධ්‍යවේදීන් ජනවාරි මාසයේදී සමරනවා අනුස්මරණය කරනවා. මේ වැඩපිළිවෙලට අදාළ මේ වර්ෂයේ කළු ජනවාරියේ නිදහස් මාධ්‍ය ව්‍යාපාරය සංවිධානය කළ වැඩසටහන පසුගිය ජනවාරි 31 වෙනිදා ශ්‍රී ලංකා පුවත්පත් ආයතන ශ්‍රවණාගාරයේදී පැවැත්වුණා. වැඩසටහනේ ප්‍රධාන ආරාධිත දේශනය පැවැත්වුවේ ආචාර්ය සාවිත්‍රී ගුණසේකර.
ප්‍රචණ්ඩත්වය මත ආණ්ඩු ක්‍රමයක් ඇතිවීම සම්පූර්ණ ප්‍රතික්ෂේප කළා.
නිදහස් මාධ්‍ය ව්‍යාපාරයේ කැඳවුම්කාරණී හනයි ඉබ්‍රාහිම්, ලේකම් ලසන්ත ද සිල්වා වගේම නිදහස් මාධ්‍ය ව්‍යාපාරයේ විධායක කමිටු සමාජික හිටපු කැඳවුම්කරු සුනිල් ජයසේකරත් එහිදී අදහස් දැක්වුවා. නිදහස් මාධ්‍ය ව්‍යාපාරයේ සමාජිකයින්, මාධ්‍යවේදීන්, වෘත්තීය සමිති ක්‍රියාකාරීන් වගේම සිවිල් සංවිධාන ක්‍රියාකාරීන් සහ නීතිඥයන් ඇතුළු පිරිසක් වගේම විදේශීය බංග්ලාදේශ, ඉන්දියාව සහ පාකිස්තානය නියෝජනය කරමින් විදේශීය මාධ්‍යවේදීන් පිරිසක්ද මේ වැඩසටහනට එක් වෙලා හිටියා. වැඩසටහන මෙහෙයුවේ නිදහස් මාධ්‍ය ව්‍යාපාරයේ ලේකම් ලසන්ත ද සිල්වා විසින්. රටින් ප්‍රචණ්ඩත්වය තුරන් කිරීම, ඒ වගේම භාෂණයේ නිදහස ප්‍රවර්ධනය කිරීම, එහිදී උදාහරණයක් විදිහට පසුගියදා පෙරදින විශ්වවිද්‍යාලයේ පැවැත්වීමට නියමිත වූ තිබුණු රැස්වීමක් අවලංගු කිරීම ගැන ආචාර්ය සාවිත්‍රී ගුණසේකර විශේෂයෙන් පෙන්වලා දුන්නා.
The optics are right, it's good. But then in the University of Redenia, the Vice Chancellor says to a group of academics, don't talk about the critique, the government's policies on debt restructuring.
ඒ වගේම ජාත්‍යන්තර වශයෙන් අය සඳහන් කළා ජාත්‍යන්තර වශයෙන් පසුගියදා අවුෂ්විට්ස් වදකඳවුර ගැන පැවැත්වුණු සම්මන්ත්‍රණයකදී පැවැත්වුණු සංවත්සරයකදී ගාසා තීරය ගැන කිසිදු ආකාරයකින් සඳහන් කළේ නැහැ කියන එක ආචාර්ය ගුණසේකර විශේෂයෙන්ම පෙන්වලා දුන්නා. ඒ වගේම තමන්ගේ දේශනය අවසන් කරමින් ආචාර්ය සාවිත්‍රී ගුණසේකර අවධාරණය කළේ ශ්‍රී ලංකාවේ සිස්ටම් චේන්ජ් එකක් අවශ්‍ය නම්, ශ්‍රී ලංකාවේ ක්‍රමයේ වෙනසක් අවශ්‍ය නම් ඒ සඳහා විධායක ජනාධිපති ක්‍රමය අත්‍යවශ්‍යයෙන්ම අවලංගු කළ යුතු බව, අහෝසි කළ යුතු බව. මේ විධායක ජනාධිපති ක්‍රමයක් තියාගෙන කිසිදු ආකාරයක සිස්ටම් චේන්ජ් එකක් කළ නොහැකි බව ඇය පැහැදිලිව පෙන්වා දුන්නා.
I would ask for media support to bring back into the discourse the need for constitutional reform now and not later in order to abolish this terrible executive presidency. ප්‍රචණ්ඩත්වය කියන දේ අපි පිළිකුල් කළ යුතුයි. සෑම සමාජයේ තිබුණා, අවුලේ තිබුණා, ඒ ප්‍රචණ්ඩත්වය කියන අදහස අපි ප්‍රතික්ෂේප කළ යුතුයි. එසේ කිරීම ඉතින් අපිට මතක් කරගන්න අපි මාධ්‍ය විශේෂයෙන් මේකට ලක් වුණා කියලා අපිට සැලකන්න බෑ. මොකද අපේ සමාජය අපි කියනවා කොහොමද ප්‍රචණ්ඩත්වය කියලා. ඉතින් මේ වගේ දිනක අපි මතක් කරගන්න ඕනේ මේ ජනමාධ්‍ය තාමත් මේ මාධ්‍ය කියපු හැටි කලින් කියපු හැටි ඉතාමත් අපි ගෞරව කළ යුතුයි. තමන්ගේ ජීවිතේ ආය පරිත්‍යාගය කියලා මොකක්ද ඒ රටේ සුබසාහනය වෙනුවෙන් චින්තනය ප්‍රකාශ කිරීමේ අදහස ඒවා ඉතාමත් වැදගත් කියලා ඒ සාර ධර්මයන් අත ආත්මවගේ නියුතුය කියන අදහස. අපි ගෞරව කිරීම මතක් කළ යුතුයි. අපේ රටවල ප්‍රචාරණය හැමතැනම තියෙනවා. මේ වගේ අවස්ථාවක අපි යන සැලකන අපේ ජන කොට්ටාසය ගැන සැලකන්න සෑම විටම අපි ප්‍රචාරණය කරනවා. මට මේක මතක් වුණේ ඒ අවුෂ්විට්ස් වල යෙදෙන ජාත්‍යන්තර අදහස් මතුවෙලා United Nations reparations කියලා අදහසක් නැතුණේ. මේක කවදාවත් නොවිය යුතු තත්ත්වයක් නෙමෙයි. නම අවශ්‍ය සමරණය. මාත් කිසිදයක් කියන්නේ. ඉතින් අපි ඒකට සැලකන්නේ මේ ප්‍රචණ්ඩත්වය අපේ කොටසකට අපිට කිට්ටුව තියෙන තත්ත්වයකට යන අපි මේක සැලකනවා නමුත් සමෝසේ අපි ඉතින් මේ වගේ දෙන්නට මම කියනවා වැදගත් කරුජානවාරිය මාධ්‍යයේ විශේෂ වෙනදක් තිබුණාට අපිට සමෝසේ බලපාන විශේෂයෙන් ආණ්ඩුවක් විසින් ඒ වගේ ප්‍රචණ්ඩත්වය මත ආණ්ඩු ක්‍රමයක් ඇතිවීමයි සම්පූර්ණ ප්‍රතික්ෂේප කරනවා. So thank you very much. I'm going to spare a few words in response to the purpose and the objective of this meeting today, which is to remember and recall the enormous courage and commitment of your profession and in speaking truth to power. And speaking truth to power is necessary in many situations. It's necessary in the family, it's necessary in the community, and it's necessary, crucially, in governance. So they pay a sacrifice for that. And today then is an occasion for us to say, never more. No to violence wherever it occurs. Because we tend, I think, to recognize violence when it's on our doorstep, in our country, in our community. But when it touches others, we are not so conscious of this rejection of violence. And I saw this in the celebrations of the televised media versions of the recent Holocaust commemoration, where there was no reference to the ongoing violence in Lebanon or Gaza. But there was a huge outpouring of grief. Now, what was the purpose of that event? It is to remember that what occurred there, the Holocaust, to be totally unacceptable. And we have to say never more. And indeed, the United Nations and the structure of international governance was born of that idea. So I think it's important on occasions like that to remember that. And also at the same time, we see violence, but we must also recognize we have had victories. And I would like to flag today one of the areas in which we did succeed, and the media was part of it, we collectively did that. The peaceful transfer of power and elections. We have forgotten that. We had extremely violent elections in this country. But today, the last two elections, that didn't happen because government wanted it, or the politicians wanted it. That's because there was enormous outpouring of protest, civil society, people, to say never more for violence at elections. So let us also not be too cynical and declare victories, because the media has been crucial in giving that leadership, even in the area of election violence. So we must, as we recognize the failures, we should also recognize that there have been successes, and Black Friday is surely a day not to be selective, to reject the concept of violence, and also to reflect on the broader issues of abuse of power and violence, and specifically in governance. I think this is what is important, and I'm going to do today. The concept of why there is violence. Now, we need to know what is your role and responsibility as a free media made movement. Because there is also confusion as to why you need free media. There is a sense that this is a Western idea. It's not relevant to us in Sri Lanka because it's born of a Western liberal future. I think we must remember that it may have originated in the West, but these rights, freedom of speech, expression, thought, was not given to us. They were fought for, also by people like journalists. So it was never given to us. And if it was so, that concept of the relevance of these ideas is also embedded in our own religions. In the Buddhist religion, for instance, it is push it, if the idea of freedom of thought, expression and speech is embedded in Buddhism. But do politicians ever recognize that? No. They ritualize religion, they go to temples, they give you baskets of flowers and fruit to the monks. And they reject this idea that the whole concept of Buddhism is freedom of thought, freedom of ideas, freedom to think. So I think when we see this in government, we also need to challenge that there is legitimacy in challenging and speaking truth to power. This was also the context in which, in this country, again, let us remember, we have had 22 amendments to the Constitution. But the issue of freedom of speech has been fought for in the courts, and we have not been able to reject it. In fact, the Right to Information Act, which public servants say is such a powerful weapon in their hands, because at least they have a justification to say what they have to say. Where did it come from? With enormous support from the community, leadership from the press, and the freedom movement and other journalists. So we succeeded in that. So we have had a tradition of recognizing the importance of the work that you do. So let us not give up and say, no, it has been rejected. No, we have had the spaces, we have found the spaces, and you have made a contribution. So it's also an occasion to declare victories, and as Hanai Brab said, to say that is what we have to sustain, because that is so important. And remember, that is why there was so much objection to the OSA, the Online Safety Act. Why? Because it was basically saying what the Prime Minister said in Parliament. You sit down, you shut up. I put you there. What is that? What is that? That is an expression of exercise of power to stop speech, to stop response, to stop talking to the public. And that is exactly what the democratic tradition says. It's a system of government, true, born of the West, but we see it in other societies also. In the communitarian values that you found embedded in also Buddhism. So speaking truth to power in this country has not been totally delegitimized. It has been recognized. True, there are failures, but it has been recognized. Now it is in that context, I think it's very necessary for your movement to also recognize the challenges of IT. Why? Because for the first time, media is used to create confusion as to what is fact, what is fiction, what is truth, what is falsehood. And that is wonderfully, it's a wonderful space for authoritarian governments. Because what you do, you create mistrust in the press, in the media, and you say all lies, everything is lies, everything is fake news. So who knows what is true? And this is powerfully demonstrated in the elections in the United States. How is it possible that with all those visuals, there's a large cohort of people who still think that those things didn't happen? Because the power of communication, media, IT, social media is so great. So it's a new challenge. So what is then the answer to that? I believe that rather than ask, a lot of people's response is, I saw a recent statement from a women's group, government come and stop this. Wonderful for the government, right? Super, because what you do, you stop, you say, press is overstating everything, fake news, etc. So stop, regulate and restrict. And then what happens? Abuse of power. So I think it's important for this, your movement also, you were happy to hear that you've done a study of the laws, and that's very important, right?
Yeah.
What is the law in the books? But you have to go beyond that, because those laws in the books may not be implemented. And now you have another challenge, because your very profession is being challenged for perpetrating fake news, false news, etc. So you have to have a system or regulation before the state comes in. Because when the state comes in, you can be, as like in the OSA, you can see it's going to be very, very strict and repressive. Hence the objection also to the OSA. Now it's interesting that the opposition, the current opposition, in other words, the major parties, including party in government, all committed to repealing the OSA. Has anyone heard any talk of repeal of the OSA? No. And why is that? Because it is a powerful hand, a powerful strategy in the hand of the government. I want to also touch on another discourse which has come recently, which is that Sri Lanka is a failed state. So the explanation often repeated in government is the 75 අවුරුදු සාපයක් 75 අවුරුදු සාපයක් මේක ඉක්මනට විසඳන්න බෑ. In other words, 75 years of bad governance, a terrible country, how can we do anything in a short time? Let's reflect on the past. I come from a different generation and I want to spend a few minutes reflecting on the past. Have we had a failed state from day one, from independence? No. Because this country, in my generation, we were නිදහස් සෞඛ්‍ය සහ අධ්‍යාපන ලාභී. We had access to free education and women would not have the social indicators in this country for health and education if we were not නිදහස් and සෞඛ්‍ය අධ්‍යාපන ලාභී. And now, today, there is a mistaken approach to giving access to health and education. Why did Sri Lanka, in the first statistics after COVID, hit the headlines as one of the countries that had done very well? Why? Because we had a public health system in place. But what happened? Within a short time, the political interference came, and for the education had been disrupted for decades through political interference, but the doctors were okay. Then what happened? 2020, political interference, throwing pots of penny into the sea, etc., into the river, etc., etc., whole thing changed. So, political interference with those important things was a factor for a lot of the bad governments that we had. But we had those visionary policies. And we should not write them off because they impacted our generations. And today, our social indicators for women and children in South Asia still are better because of those policies. Then look at law enforcement. Now today there is enormous disenchantment with law enforcement. We had a judiciary, we had a public service, we had judicial review of legislation. Of course this is not perfect, no, but we had substantive. We had a public service which was professional, which was committed, and there was no interference. So they were, to that extent, good administrators, partners with government. Right? So that also was sorry. We have forgotten the manner in which emblematic cases then were prosecuted. Bandaranayaka's assassin was part of a huge political movement. But there was prosecution, unsuccessful prosecution. So things changed. So it's wrong to suggest, I think, and we need to challenge that discourse, that this has been a failed state. But we have lost it for several reasons. And we have to recognize what. A lot of people dismiss the law because it's not implemented, but they also dismiss the constitutions. Compare the 1972 constitution. What did it do? It created the sense that parliament was a sovereign, not the people. It's a new concept. So what did it do? Interfere with the judiciary, interfere with the public service, all the pillars, and the press, the seizing of the press. Why? Because in a democracy, we have to choose. You can have authoritarian governance, you can have a democracy. We have for 75 years chosen democracy. Now it is said much better to have a single leader who shuts everybody up. So there's discourse on that, you know. Democracy has failed. So therefore, let's have an authoritarian leader. What happens to the press? There's no room for the press. Because in a democracy, you may be cynical about it, but you are the fourth estate. There are pillars for preparation of powers. You have the concept of the legislature, then you have the and you have the adhikara. That has to be balanced. And who helps to ensure that balance? The voice of the people as articulated to the press. That's why you call the fourth estate. So the three pillars, you're not a pillar, but you're a support. So when that goes, can you have democracy? Can you have system change? You can't. So that happened in 72. But then what happened in 78? In 78, you created the executive presidency. And what did the executive presidency do? Complete aggrandizement of power without controls in the executive branch. So that happened in 78. So for us to talk of system change today and not address constitutional change, to shift to a different kind of government is not possible, because we have to remember that particularly from 2005, up to the last election, we have seen the aggrandizement of executive power, how it has been abused at every level. You see, even the OSA, they are criticizing the judgment because we say it is a weak judgment. It didn't address the fundamentals. Why? Because of those impact of politics on that. So, therefore, I think it's not really correct to suggest that we can have system change without really looking at the fundamental structures of governance. And if you reflect on the violence against the media, I think one of the things we do is we don't link it to the manner in which governance and authoritarianism has tied to the media. We tend to not see that connection, right? So that is why today we say, please let the government respect the media. Let them do that. Let them please, on their mandate, do that. That's what we want. That's what we voted for. We say that. And we request that. And we demand that. But for so many years, we have made our public institutions dysfunctional. We have made our public service dysfunctional. Look at the manner in which this abuse of power through that presidential system has impacted universities. Now, the president has been saying over and over again, very moderate, he says, you know, we have to get together to solve our problems, we will respect diversity of views. The optics are right, it's good. But then in the University of Redenia, the Vice Chancellor says to a group of academics, don't talk about the critique the government's policies on debt restructuring. Not allowed. Not allowed. I think the Island newspaper had something on it, and I think my friend and colleague produced Deepika put a comment. But silence. Why? In my time, in my generation, they would have summoned the university senate. The professors would have said, we want the university senate meeting. Why? Because you can't have this in a university. You can't say shut up and don't talk about this. That's the whole point of university. Diversity, respect for things. They didn't do that. So these things have become dysfunctional. And that is because the power structures are still there. We still say that there is a presidential system. So, the university vice chancellor, you know, I am appointed by the president. Somebody else will come and say, I said this, so I have to be careful. Has that changed? No. So we have to create a new structure which will facilitate that. And you can't do that. And you cannot have system change where you continue this fundamental authoritarian system. So I think we have to understand that no to violence against journalism is part of a wider issue of violence and authoritarianism in the country. And that violence and abuse of power, unchecked, has grown after 2005. Up to that time, there were institutions at least to function to some extent. 2005 to 2024, it was completely different. And so at the end of the day, you have the desire for system change. You have maybe the government also. Some, of course, there are statements which are not so conducive to media. There are some people who say, don't interfere with us, we are doing our job. Press is keep quiet. But the majors, they just say we will give space. But if the country has now become pulverized and these institutions have become dysfunctional because of this system, then can you overnight say system change? And my conclusion is that I don't think you can. And therefore I would ask for media support to bring back into the discourse the need for constitutional reform now and not later, in order to abolish this terrible executive presidency, so that President President can come into Parliament as a respected Prime Minister of the country, and we can try to put in place those new structures and systems of governance that will facilitate the system change that we want. And I hope the media will support that. Thank you.